And got it. And share the screen, and we'll go here. All right, so the plan for today is I'm going to show you an app that I made that has some interesting features that you could incorporate into your app, and also talk about a major concept in JavaScript that we haven't talked about before. Okay, so this app, which is the example that we're talking about, guys, go ahead and turn off your screens, I guess. Thank you. Phones away. Is a game thing that prompts the user with some pictures of a foreign language, and you, based on just what you know, try to guess what it is. And, you know, standard quiz type of thing. You know, you get it right, you get a point, you get it wrong, you lose a point. Some interesting features are that it's choosing from the list at random. It's choosing 3 pictures that are associated with that. It offers the user the opportunity to try it later if you have no clue, and you can do some more and then come back to it. If you get it wrong, your score goes down 1. So the highest possible score is however many there are. And of course, it's counting how many are left. One of the new features you may not have seen is that the list from the dropdown is only from the remaining possible list of answers. So as you get this one, this is check. You choose that. Okay, you get it right. Check is no longer an option from the list. This list is constantly being updated with the remaining possibilities. If you get it right, that one is removed from the list. Okay, so this is a dynamic, I'll say element, not instead of object, because we're going to talk about objects specifically, that we haven't done that before. Most of the times we've used dropdowns, we've hard coded in the answers or possibilities in the design mode, but there is the ability to set the options for a dropdown in the code, which allows you to do it several times, which is what's happening here. So this one is Hebrew, guess, got it right. And the next one comes up and Hebrew is not an option. Okay, and you go through and play it as is. Now, how does it work? Well, first, I've linked it here in the spreadsheet. It's called Language Quiz with Object. And if we look at it, the first thing you will notice is this object, this variable, which we have not seen this format before. Okay, this is what's known as object notation. Okay, it's defined with curly brackets, open, close curly brackets, and it is the main phrase that you need to understand is called key value pairs. So if I write a new one, my object and or var my object gets, and then open and close curly bracket, the notation is key, whatever you set the key. I'm writing the word literally key. You wouldn't actually do that. Colon, and then value. And if you only have one, that's fine. But if you have multiples, it needs to be separated by a comma. The most common example for an object that you will ever see is some sort of contacts lists where you would have name, James, which does it need to be a string? Or let me try this, console.log my object. Is it going to let me do it? No. Okay, so it needs to be a string if it's the actual, then the key does not need to be a string, I don't believe. Yeah. Okay. So name, age, and hometown. Let's try gnome. Okay. So what is it missing? Some, if it's missing, so just tell me. Okay, so this is an object. Okay, open, close curly brackets, a key, and then a value, where if we console log this my object, you will see it comes out, it says object, then everything that's there. Pretty obvious. Now, if we do, let's see if we can make it a little bigger. If we do console log my object dot name, it finds that key and brings back that value. So this whole thing works as a very neat way of organizing data, where just like before, where we'd say, you know, an item in an array at index 0 that works just like a variable. This allows you to organize tons of information in a situation. Now, you will almost always see it as an array of objects. Okay, so this one is the first one that I use in the actual program. You can see it starts with a square bracket. So we know we're looking at an array, a list. And if you go all the way down to the bottom, we'll talk about what this actually is. You can see the corresponding one. I haven't clicked on that because I clicked on or had my cursor right after that first open square bracket. It highlights this, so you know it's the corresponding one. But the array called full object is an array of objects. Okay, and the reason you will do it's a way of, it's just a super efficient way of organizing information. It is so efficient that it is used in other programming languages, in other formats. It's called JavaScript object notation. And if you've ever seen or heard of a JSON file, JSON, JavaScript object notation is that. It's super useful, it's super efficient to refer to things. Okay, and so this first my object is just a single object. If I make it into a list of objects, okay, so this list only has one in it, and so let's add another one. I'm going to put this on a new line so that it's clear. And so let's go and copy this. And Jane, and she's 25, and she's from New York. Okay, York, whatever, that might be a place. So now I have, my object is, let's just call it my list of objects. Now has, oh yeah, let's call it here. Now has 2 objects in it. And if I console log my list of objects, you can see it brings down here 2 objects. Okay, and if I want to find the name in the second one, I would say I need to, I'm already here. What's the next level? Find the object that I'm looking for, which is my list of objects index 1. It's the second object. And if I run that, it'll be just the Jane. And if I do my list of objects index 1 dot name, it should just be Jane. Okay, so it's this hierarchy. It's called dotted notation. This is the dot in dotted notation that I'm looking for. I'm looking at my list of objects. Index 1 is the second item, the second index in that list, and name is one of the keys. Now, you can have other data types in this besides, so far we only have a string and a number. as the value, but we can have a list in there. Okay, so let's say we have, the issue is the rows of an object need to be separated by a comma. The last one doesn't. Let's have some friends, Jim, John, that needs to be, these are all strings, and Jesse, I don't know why, all the J's. Okay, so now if I console log my list of objects index 1, it'll be the entire Jane one. If I console log my list of objects index 1 dot friends, it'll be just that array. And if I do my list of objects index 1 dot friends index 0, it should just be Jim. Okay, so it's all the hierarchy. And like I said, super useful. And that's what I have here. And I could switch it back to blocks. I usually switch back to blocks just because it's easier to identify things. I don't think that's necessarily true with object notation because of there's just a lot of stuff going on here. The way it's used in this app is there's one object. The list is called full objects, which really it's a list, with a square bracket. Each index in full object is an object with the first key is language name, and for each object, the value is that language, and the second item in the object is a list of images or URLs for strings. Okay, and that's how we get 3 in there. Now, the reason why this came about is because the way AppLab works is, and this is an earlier version, I originally had it as a table. The problem with AppLab's tables, even though it's a it's a custom table, I went in and made new columns and put in one for each row. It won't let you put a list as a value in any one of these. And I really wanted that for the ability to have several images and be able to add images as it went. You can see how this is actually set up like an object. If you go to any one of the data tables, custom or provided, and click on debug view, this is what it looks like. It gives you, it is actually a sneaky JavaScript object notation. And I believe that's the case for any one of these. Okay, if we go to this one, go to debug view, you can see this is what the table actually is. It actually is a list, square bracket, a list of JavaScript objects. And AppLab just sort of simplifies the way you interpret it. But the problem is that if you want to share something, or not share, share, or rather, if you just remix this one, this is the one with the data without the objects, and you go into the remix version, remix doesn't bring along tables, which is fine if you are using one of the AppLab tables. Whoever's remixing can just bring it in. But if you have a custom table, it's kind of lost. That was the origin of using this object, the object notation for the languages example. Okay, so if you want, you can look through how this works. And like I said, it's available. The idea of JavaScript objects is there's variable, there's list, string. Object is on that top level of types of what's it called? data organization, data format. I can't think of the right word. But that's that. And if you want, like I said, you can go through and work this out. Now, what I really want to talk about is some stuff about your project. Okay, we're starting to jump ahead, or going to start jumping ahead to the written response stuff. And you may get to a point in the written response that you realize your app is not good enough. That's fine. Like I said, I always say, the sooner you find out something isn't good, the better. It's called fast to failure. It is a major concept in business and innovation and tech. Something's not going to work. You want to find out as soon as possible. Let's find out. Okay, so in the folder called Create Task Project, there is a document. There's several documents. There is one called Chief Readers Report. This is, I believe it's the first year I've had access to it, and I'm not sure, but it goes through all of, well, it's the what's it called? College boards sort of, I don't want to say internal, because I don't think it's like confidential, but sort of the result, and it gives a lot of insight into what the readers are actually looking for. And we're going to go over some of the stuff. We looked at this before, and you can see that the distribution of scores from 1 to 5 is pretty bell curvy. So this isn't like getting an A on your report card for a class where it's like there's a certain number of points. If you get the points, you get an A. I'm not positive they are distributing their scores as a bell curve. It might just be happening because that's how bell curves work. But what's up? Put on the test as a grade? No. Everything for you and College Board is between you and College Board. I'm just sort of guiding you a little bit along the process. And so this Chief Readers Report also has the average score for each row, which somehow is less than 50% for each one. I wonder why it's so bad. You shouldn't be this bad at this. You know, I'm positive you will do better at this. Okay, so some of the things, it goes through each of the rows of the rubric and talks about what did well and what did not do well. And this first section from here on page 2 all the way up to before this table is the same thing as this table, but a little bit more in paragraph form rather than table form. So we're going to go over the table real quick. The first row is about showing input and output. And let's go, let me see here. I want to see the 6 rows. Okay, remember there's 6 rows in the, in the rubric. Almost all of them are about the written response. But again, you need to have a app that works so that you can have it work in the written response. Okay, so row 1 is about purpose, function, and input and output. Okay, things that didn't work well, confusing purpose and function. This will be an issue. You all will have some purpose or function to your app. Just we'll talk about what the issue is, confusing purpose with function and confusing like the actual how it works with, or like if you have a game, confusing the purpose of the game with the purpose of the app. Okay. And demonstrating input and output. Okay. Bad would be user clicks on, describing the user clicks on the blue target and the game is over. That is not the input. The input is the user's guess or something like that. And the output would be the result. You're not describing it specifically. Okay, high score stated the purpose for the program. That went beyond the function of the program. Okay, purpose and function, different things. Okay, so getting into the actual app. You need a list that manages complexity. Okay, things that did not do well. Things that did not do well. Identifying the list from list as a table from which they built the list. Okay, so when you are identifying your list, if you have a list called names that is a get columns, the name of your list is names, not full names. Okay, you need to refer to the list. You need to refer to the where the list gets data. So if you initialize it as an empty list, that's not the part of the list part of your code you're going to show. Okay, providing mini lists, which describe the prompt, not indicating the list. Okay, so this is more making sure you have a parameter. But the part that I need to make sure that you do not, or make sure your program has an example of, okay, students inaccurately described their program, that their program could not be completed without the lists when the list was simplistic and could be replaced with a few individual variables. Okay. Your list needs to be something that you iterate through, meaning you loop through somewhere on there. You don't absolutely need to have, random number 0 to list.length -1, but that is an example of having some code that generalizes the use of that list. So if the list changes size, it still works. And obviously, if you have a super long list, you couldn't replace that with a few individual variables. But if you have a list with like hard-coded 3 names in it, that's not, and there's nowhere where it adds or removes things from it, that is not going to be complex enough. And that would be a situation where if your app is set up like that, you might want to completely rework it or start in a different direction, that sort of thing. Okay, most students will identify the list of the program. Some students were able to use the list in a manner that reduces complexity. Students were able to explain the written responses, how the list managed. On the other hand, some students wrote about managing complexity in general. Okay, again, this is more stuff we'll worry about in actually putting the right words in the written response. But right now we're trying to find examples or reasons why your current app isn't good enough. Good evening. Okay, so here is the other issue that might be an issue for your app is having your main function not be good enough, not be complex enough, not have certain aspects to it, and only having one function. Like if your only function in it is update screen, that's not good enough. You need a function that contributes to the app working correctly, not just is the app. Meaning, or one way that would prove this is if you have a function that runs differently depending on what parameters, or technically arguments, are sent to it, that would, and it's, removed from the update screen function, if you have one, that would be an example of that. Okay, algorithm, abstraction, algorithm, implementation, testing. Okay, anything you see procedural, that just means functions. Okay, students were asked to provide 2 code segments. The first showing procedure uses as one explicit parameter required to perform the function, and the second code segment shows where the function is called. Okay, write about the procedure, and found it easier to connect. Okay, so this is more about writing it. Students are asked to demonstrate sequencing, selection, and iteration. Okay, sequencing is just things running in order. Selection is just a conditional, like an if statement, and iteration is a loop. Okay, whether it was included in a procedure with parameters or not. Okay, additionally, students were asked to write a description of how their code segment works, enough in detail, so there's more writing. Describe your code segment, how it would work. Someone could recreate it, which is essentially explaining it to the reader. That's another way of interpreting that. Okay, in general, most students were able to present code segment, use sequence, selection, iteration, but some failed to explain their code in enough detail. Students were asked to describe 2 calls to the code segment representing procedure, each passing different arguments. This is what I'm talking about. You need to call the function 2 different ways. I believe that explicit or implicit means that if your function sends the parameter, like a get text, that could be, because different things could go into get text, it would count as it being called 2 different ways, but you will need to explain an example where something different happens based on what was sent. It can't just be get text and then it puts that text into a string, hello, so-and-so. That's not doing something. You need to use that parameter in that function to run some different part of the code, which is essentially means you're going to have some sort of conditional or an if statement that checks for something about that parameter, and it does something if it does, and does something else if it doesn't. Okay, so like I said, this is the type of thing that may have you want to completely restart your app, which there's still plenty of time to do it now that you have more focus and understanding. Okay, describe different arguments cause the execute the procedure differently with different results. On the other hand, some students describe calls to 2 different procedures or described. Okay, so this is more about making sure you put the right stuff in your written response. Okay, and so this is row, okay, list is still row 3. Okay, row 4, make sure your function has a parameter. Row 5, make sure you have selection that doesn't use it in a trivial manner, meaning if your if statement is if y is greater than 0, when y is always greater than 0, that is useless. That's not a good conditional. Okay, you lose points if including an algorithm that does not contain iteration, have meaningful iteration. Okay, meaning a loop, looping through a list and checking for something. That's how you're going to get iteration and selection, or one way I should say. Some responses highlighted the algorithm that's not included the loop and only iterates. So this whole column, this left column, is what didn't get points. Providing not enough detail, describing the algorithm doesn't, okay, describing a different algorithm. Okay, getting points. High scores included reasonable uses selection with conditionals, non-trivial. High scoring responses included a loop that was used meaningfully. High scoring responses included significant detail, okay, describing it again. Just one algorithm or procedure. Okay, if for some reason you include 2 different procedures in your written response, they're only going to grade the first one. Okay. You need to describe in the, okay, so calling it twice, you need to explain how the function is called. That one function is called twice, not two different functions. Two calls the same procedure that calls the same sequence to run. Okay, misconception here is that a procedure that has two different outcomes must be doing something differently inside respect to computation. Okay, your function needs to have two, essentially an if-else statement where something different happens based on that. Like I said, you can send a parameter or get text to the function, and that function takes that parameter and puts it into a concatenation of, like I said, hello plus username plus welcome to whatever, and that's using a parameter, but that's not using any conditional, and the same set of code is running regardless. That's not good enough. Okay, other things that parameter indicates the number of times loop repeats, but the exact same loop. Okay, so same loop is not good enough. Setting the value of implicit parameter inside the procedure instead of immediately before. Not quite sure what that is. Identify input arguments and output values, but not describe. Okay, so this is just more description of your app. Okay, high scoring, we're still on row 6 right here. High scoring responses included two calls the same procedure with different arguments. High scoring responses provided two different arguments that would cause different sequences of code to execute in each place, leading to a unique result. Okay, argument is just parameter, but at the point where it's called an argument, and the point where it's received in the function definition, it's a parameter. Okay, for example, linear search on a list which has two outcomes. If one argument matches a list element and other argument, and the other argument does not match the list element, in the first case, the body it's executed. So if you have a table with two columns and you're checking for if the name at index I is something and the age at index I is something else, meaning it meets both of the criteria, do the if, else do something else. Okay, in that case, you would be sending two different parameters. And that would look good also. High scoring response that use implicit parameters, set the values of the parameters before the described procedure, call in anticipation of calling procedure. I don't think that's right. Using the procedure then uses these global variables to perform computation behaving like an argument. I don't think global variables, I might be misunderstanding. Okay, description of each call. Okay, so like I said, I do think having a single call of a function that uses the get text does count as two. You could show it two different ways. But an example I know counts as two different ways is in this language, guest language app. I have the function flash text is, what does it do? It is expecting a true or, oh no, wait, no, it's not flash text. What's the one with cut? Set board. Okay, set board is expecting a parameter that is either true or false. And based on that, if it is true, meaning they got it right, it removes something. And if not, it doesn't. At various points in this app, set board is called with a true. Set board true, meaning remove the item, and set board false does not remove the item. Okay, that's an example of calling the function 2 different times with different parameters. You don't need something that complex, but I do think having a function call that is called with different parameters or different arguments will absolutely meet that requirement of showing 2 different times with different parts of the function, different parts of code running based on that parameter, where completely different things happen. In this case, the set board has return in it. So meaning if they get it right, it removes that object, it sets screen and text, and it return, which we haven't used return in as a way of ending a function, where if return gets called, it ignores everything else, which is what I would want if they get it right. Removing the item and then resetting the board and so on. Okay, so you can start to think about whether or not your app is complex enough, or at least meets these minimum requirements. Okay, so if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to post this video at some point. But the reason I did this now is because if you are way off the track, spending some mental time over spring break thinking about it wouldn't do you any harm. All right, let me know if you have any questions.